our home. When you've been to our home, you've seen Betsy Williams work in many places. Betsy, could you explain a little bit about how this began and how you and Joanna collaborated? Because this is the best example I know of collaboration and making local and global connections, which are things that we care very much about.
Well, I joined Instagram in 2015, I think, and became friends with Joanna through Instagram. And one of my favorite aspects of this project is how it evolved naturally. It unfolded without, I think, either of us thinking of what it might become. It was a natural progression. Joanna and I both have a keen interest in Japanese culture. So through her, I learned of the Microseasons. And we began going back and forth sort of informally until it turned into a project that we focused on over the course of a year.
It's wonderful because of one of the things in the very front of the book you say, and this is what grabbed me, was I want people to go outside and I want them to spend a moment and connect with what's going on with them around nature. And the other thing that was so powerful that you said was, and this isn't something you have to do all the time. You do it once, you put it down, you come back to it, you do it again. And after enough time, eventually you will have seen everything going around. How does that connection, what led you to want to make that connection and that suggestion for the readers of your book?
I'm not sure I can answer that, Ferdy, except to say I live on top of a mountain. My nearest neighbor is maybe within screaming distance if the wind is right. So I spend a lot more time outside with trees and I work in clay, so it's just that is my world. It's not an urban environment. It's not even a suburban environment. It's a world in which I've found being outside and noticing things can settle your mind in a way that nothing else can. And so the pandemic, especially with the pandemic, in the early days, we didn't know, how do you catch COVID? How is it transmitted? Are you supposed to sanitize your groceries or spritz your mail or, all of that stuff? And at that, I'm sorry for the sunlight, but at that point, I'll scrooge down. At that point, the only safe place to be seemed like it was outside. And now that we know more about air particles and all of that, it still seems like the only safe place to be is outside. And there's some sort of metaphor of our modern day existence. It's changing architecture, it's changing the way we go through the day. So that's where that came from.
It's beautiful. And I know there are other things that your connection with the world, and I'm just going to drop one little thing that also has inspired me. You have gone outside and you have been investigating different types of native clay I think 142 types of clay and glazes and things that you have discovered just walking around, and now you're beginning to use those as part of your process. So in terms of making a local connection, your local connection of what you see outside your door and how you're doing that is extraordinary. But then in terms of the global connection, that's where I want to now turn to Joanna, because this is such a wonderful story. We know that the root cause of most of the problems that we're experiencing these days is from the loss of connection. And here the two of you have created this great connection. And this is only the second time you've ever seen each other, from what I understand, because you are doing everything, as we call it, asynchronously, like Celia has to do. You didn't do it in real time. You did it in the time that you were able to do it. So please, Joanna, let people know a little about you and how you got started in this.
I think it helps that both Betsy and I are deep introverts, because that helps with introverts like communicating in short bursts and not feeling like there's a pressure to answer immediately or to give a big background. So I could come at her with something very random and short, and she'd completely accept that and work with it, and it had no explanation. Or, I mean, I could come across as completely crazy, but she it works very well for introverts who find people quite exhausting and spend a lot of time in nature, so are comfortable with nature. So I think we were on the same wavelength when we first began communicating with each other via Instagram. And I had moved from London. I've been working in the city of London for 15 years and moved to the countryside, even though I'd grown up in the countryside, but was quite disconnected. And we moved to a place we could afford, so it was somewhere I didn't know, and I wasn't very connected to it. So finding about the Microseasons, the Japanese version, I was using it to connect to where I lived, because I knew nothing about where I lived. I knew nothing about the things that it flooded once a year. And in fact, I wasn't really going out. I wasn't really finding out about it, because I think I was just paralyzed into, I'm suddenly living in the countryside from the city. And the Microseasons helped me to find out about where I lived at the same time as learning about Japan. And it was, at first I made haiku just on Betsy's tiny plates. She'd post a tiny plate picture, which often are nearly always of nature, but sometimes of man-made things too. They just would spring a word into my head, and I'd just write a haiku as the comment under her post. And that's where it began. And then it gradually became more and more. I think people were expecting a haiku and a plate at that point. And then Betsy suggested, well, why don't we just go for the whole year? I think I wouldn't have committed to the whole year without Betsy at all. I think I needed her to say, come on, we'll do it together. I probably wouldn't have done it on my own. And then I've gone on from then to do it several times on my own with notebooks and learn more. And I definitely know more about where I live now, and the customs and the people and the little sayings people have and the way people speak, just funny little things that you get locally. And I wouldn't have that without this project and the Microseasons at all.
Well,